Hello, and as promised, we're back. This is the second session of the third and last day of our legal summit. And today we have the privilege and the pleasure to have Bradlee, Duncan, and Juan. If you want to introduce Bradlee, please.
Sure. Welcome, Bradlee. Bradlee is the Director of Product Management at DataDriven. With 20 years experience in legal technology, he's constantly striving to streamline your administrative tasks with intuitive UX and automation so that you can spend your time executing on your most inspired work. He's passionate about web scale, leading edge cloud technologies, automation, and AI. He's truly an expert in these topics and in this field. And it's a pleasure to have you, Bradlee. Welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Juan. Thank you, Alex. It's great to be here. Thanks, everybody, for spending time with us today.
Sure.
The floor is yours. So whenever you're ready, if you want to share your slides, and we're ready to learn from you. Thank you.
Fantastic. I appreciate that. I'll just let me know, Alex, if you can see my slides. I'll jump into presenter mode here and click through. Are you able to see that okay?
Yes, you're good. Thank you.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate the time to be here with you. I thank Alex and Juan, obviously, for giving me the time. We've had an incredible selection of speakers so far. I've jotted down many notes myself to follow up on later. And so it was an exciting time. I hope you all have as well. As was mentioned, I'm Director of Product Management at NetDocuments. I've been in the legal technology industry for a couple of decades now and played many different roles, everything from kind of client implementation, client consulting, to product management, to technical support, software testing, all sorts of things. Even played a little bit on the sales side with sales engineering in some of our international markets, which was an exciting time as well. So I love this stuff. I literally grew up with legal technology, and it's been a fantastic ride. So we'll jump into this. We're going to cover a couple things. Primarily, I want to kind of break these things down in three different ways. So you'll see on the agenda here, we have kind of business problems. We'll go through a couple of business problems that have arisen during COVID-19. And this certainly is not comprehensive, this list. There are many problems that many firms and organizations have struggled with. And I want to touch on a few of those, and hopefully you can draw some parallels with your organization as well. Then after we talk about the problem, we're going to talk about the lesson that we learned from that problem. And immediately after that, how to apply or execute on that lesson learned. We don't want to get complacent here. Now that COVID is easing in some areas, it's still running pretty rough in other areas, but in some areas it's easing, and we don't want to get complacent. We want to execute, right? So we can be better the next time around. And we're going to kind of cycle through that 1, 2, 3 on this agenda here. We're going to cycle through those with a few different problems, talk about problem, lesson learned, and then execute. And then we'll have some time at the end for closing remarks and hopefully some Q&A as well. So let's dive into it. One of the things I think, as Brian wrapped up his last presentation, if you saw Brian Kuhn's presentation there, the last thing he touched on was sort of inequity or inequality type things for AI. I thought that was very applicable to actually my problem, one that I identified that came out of the pandemic, out of COVID, and that is these impact inequities from crises. Maybe it's not just the pandemic. I want you to think broader than that. But of course, we're learning from the pandemic, and then we can apply it to other situations we might be in. I want to take just a moment and talk how different people were impacted differently. I think that's obvious, but it bears emphasis here. I want to also touch on inequality versus inequity. Equality is certainly something that's incredibly important. I'm going to set it aside for the purposes of this discussion, and I want to focus on equity. And I love this alignment of equality is basically sameness, or can be interpreted as sameness, and then equity is really fairness. All right, we're after the fairness piece. I love this graphic on the right-hand side, right? It kind of shows equality versus equity. Well, equality on the left, everybody gets that same size box to watch the football game, right? And I lived in Brazil for a few years, and there's a word in Portuguese, saudade, right? I think there's a similar one in Spanish, but we don't really have that word in English quite in the same way. And I feel, looking at this picture of soccer, football, right? I feel some saudades of football. But we can see on the left here, the equality was to give everybody the same box. This brown box at the bottom, give everybody the same box. Well, that doesn't quite solve the problem for everybody. right? So equity is making it fair. And so you see on the right-hand side, the taller person, they gave their box to the shorter person. So the shorter person has 2 boxes and can see very easily. And then the person on the far right-hand side, they have built a ramp to give that person the same sort of situation, a fair situation, so they can watch that football game. All right. Some of the factors that can come into play here are outlined in this picture to the right, but also children, different ages. If your firm sent you home, like most did, right, you probably had to deal with children at home. Older children and younger children had different situations, different circumstances, different challenges across those two. I have 2 young kids, roughly 8 and 9, and that was challenging having them at home and learning from home. And they, of course, always wanted me to help them with the computer, right? So there's single parent challenges or both parents working. There's internet connectivity inequities across the world, as we know. And within your firm or within your organization, as you send people home, if one person does not have that internet connectivity, it makes it very difficult for them, right? So people are impacted differently. And here is where the rubber sort of meets the road, is your organization's tech decisions actually caused impacts differently to different people and can cause those impacts to be different across different people. And then as can the stay-at-home decisions, right? Many more. This is not an exhaustive list, but we learn that it's incredibly important to be aware of these impacts and be aware that these things impact people differently. So the lesson that we learned from that problem of having these inequitable impacts is that your people are truly your core, the core of your business. That's what keeps you driving forward, right? Are your people. And so we want to make sure that they are accounted for. There is strength in diversity, and I think we've learned that with this pandemic. People are impacted differently by the pandemic, and some worse than others, but also some better than others. And it's that diversity that can strengthen your firm. Maybe in one situation, in one crisis, certain types of people are affected very minimally. But in another crisis, it's a different group of people that are affected minimally. And so that diversity really makes you rich. I have a picture of my dog here on the right-hand side, the shaggy dog, right? She actually has a haircut in this picture, and so she's got some shorter hair. Well, we were out hiking. This is a picture from us hiking, and there still is some snow in the mountains in certain places, even though it's getting pretty hot here in Utah. But we were out walking, and she ran into a bunch of other dogs, 3 other dogs that were some other hikers, and these 3 other dogs had really short coats of fur, and they were built for the heat, right? And they played together and had fun. And after a while, the other 3 dogs kept playing, but my dog just came over and just laid in the snow. She was just exhausted. She was hot, right, from her fur, her furry coat, her shaggy coat. And so she laid down. But it's that diversity among dogs that makes dogs so interesting to many people, right? That diversity across dogs. There's something that kind of works in every situation, whether it's on the snow or playing in the summer heat or swimming or whatever it is. Same thing in biology. I have a biology background, actually, biology and chemistry, and so I love learning about these ecosystems. And sharks also are this kind of apex predator in the ocean. And you might think that, if we got rid of the sharks, then the fish would be able to grow and increase the numbers of fish and the different kinds of fish, but it's actually not the case. It's actually the exact opposite. As we have the sharks there, the diversity of the fish and the corals and the other organisms there in a coral reef expands and increases, and that reef becomes much healthier and is able to be resilient against change, more resilient. And that's with those sharks that we think of as kind of consumers or destroyers, right? But you need those sharks there. You need every piece of that ecosystem there. So there's diversity in people, in cultures, in time zones. I think this became abundantly clear in COVID is time zones. We work across time zones, but that can be beneficial. Different time zones, we can sort of extend that workday, not for any one person necessarily, but for the business as a whole, right? If you have people in different time zones, you can connect that work cycle and get things done faster overall. And this diversity really mitigates any one impact or any one problem, right? So we need to remember that technology must benefit the business as well as the employees. And in fact, to benefit the business, it has to benefit the employees. So your people are your core. You hire these good people, right? Well, we absolutely need to use the technology to empower them to bring that good. Every person has good to bring to the table. We want that technology to empower those people to bring that good to the organization. All right, that strength from diversity. Your people are paid to bring their talents to the table and add value to your business. So, of course, we'll get into it in a moment. We'll talk about the tech strategy. Your tech strategy must allow those talents of those people to shine through. That's a critically important piece, is to allow those talents to shine through. Okay, because that's what you're paying your people to do, is bring their talents. So how do we apply this lesson? How do we apply this lesson learned of making people core to your technology plan? Put them at the core of your technology plan. Well, it's important to develop a technology plan that truly removes barriers and drives equity among your entire organization, no matter the person's personal circumstances or the person's professional circumstances. If they're in a different, supporting role, whether they're a paralegal or a lawyer or any other situation, we want to make sure that drives equity across the entire organization. So we need to be able to adapt. We need technology that is flexible and can be adapted to individuals no matter their circumstances, whether that is a disability situation or whether that is just a different job role at the organization. You'll see me mention the mundane a couple of times in here. It's incredibly important that we automate the mundane. Most of the time, hopefully you did not hire your people to do something that does not need any brain power, right? That you didn't hire your people to just stamp out something that doesn't need thinking or their talents to be involved. So we want to automate those things. We want to focus on those things and automate them. We can also leverage AI, right? One that I think of that's very near and dear to my heart is email filing. If you look through my history, I sort of helped bring up some of our recent email filing solutions. We call it ND Mail at NetDocuments, and one of those leverages AI to allow you to find your filing location to file an email message within seconds. So rather than drilling down through thousands of folders or thousands of structures to find the location you want to file to, this surfaces that, right? You don't need a lot of brain power to click down through a folder structure. But if we can surface that, we can automate that, we can turn something that would take, 30 seconds, 60 seconds, a few minutes, even in some cases, to file an email message. Now we can make it just a handful of seconds to file that email message. And that's incredibly powerful. We can also enable these talents then, because then that person can spend more time doing what you truly hired them to do. I don't think you hired those people necessarily to file email, although that is an incredibly important thing to get done. It's not the thing that you want them spending their time on. You want them spending their time on the practice of law, the business of law, and helping your clients achieve their successes. So some guiding principles around this sound technology plan that truly help to put the people at the core is to build it around one source of truth. A lot of time, a tremendous amount of time is wasted as people try to find the true copy or the real copy of something, right? The original copy. If you can implement a platform that has this one source of truth so that your users know where to go to find those documents that they need or find the data or the information that they need, you can streamline their workflow. So one source of truth is critical because all of the access is built around that one source of truth. All of the history follows that item. And there's incredible power in that data, which we'll talk about in just a moment. One of the things I loved earlier in this conference, Ralph Baxter, he made a comment early on. He hit it right out of the gate there. I think he was the second speaker. I love that he hit on the billable hour, and he said that was one of the big things that firms can do is shift that mentality of charging by billable hour. He said that is one of the big constraints on adopting legal technology, because adopting legal technology, certain types of legal technology especially, firms look at as reducing their billable hours. And so they might not be incentivized to adopt that technology. But if we can mold the revenue structure of the firm and change that, shift that thinking, we can then maximize those technology investments. And I think that's a critical piece. You also will provide better service to your clients and higher throughputs. You can service more clients as well if we automate, and then we can automate those most time-consuming processes. Okay. So coming back to this is something I just showed a moment ago, but now we're going to focus on the second one at the bottom. So your tech strategy must reduce the mundane, allow those talents of your people to shine through, because that's really what you pay your people to do, is to bring their talents to the table. Okay. All right, problem number 2. when technology actually harms instead of helps a specific situation. That does happen if we have sort of a hodgepodge technology plan at the organization. It can actually harm. It can actually cause problems if we don't execute it effectively. One of the songs I love, of course, is Bon Jovi's "Living on a Prayer." Hopefully you know that song. And I feel like as I've talked to many of these organizations and these firms, I sort of scratch my head and say, is your technology strategy, is it living on a prayer? Are you just hoping for the best? Or have you really sat down and spent the time to put some thought into it? And hopefully it's the latter. Hopefully you've put some time into it. But one of the things that I think of is during the pandemic, during COVID, and even still to this day, how many times have you heard the word VPN, right? I would love to see some data, and I haven't researched this, but I would love to see some data about the use of the word VPN. You know, it is steadily growing over the years, but I'm sure in 2020 it just went off the charts, the number of times the word VPN was used in professional and even personal settings in many cases. VPNs can be a love-hate relationship, as you can imagine, and many times in 2020, I think it was much more hate than love for VPN. So adopt technologies that don't get in the way, that don't cause a problem. VPN, I think, has caused a lot of problems when it wasn't implemented correctly, or when it wasn't really used in a way that let it shine through, right? There are many cases where people just fell back on VPN rather than using a technology that could take them forward, right? In-house and on-prem tech choices turned out to make 2020 much more difficult. As we moved away from the office, as many firms moved away from the office and had more people working remotely and working at home, they realized that some of those decisions made it very challenging, opened up security holes potentially, right? Because a lot of these organizations don't have massive security infrastructure. And so as soon as they start opening that up to remote workers, now that opens up the security holes too. One of the things I want you to consider about this point in particular is, yes, those choices made 2020 more difficult, but think back, and were they actually making life more difficult even before 2020? Maybe not quite so bad, but maybe making things difficult all along, and you should have switched before. And that's what I want us to think about as we go forward, is another pandemic hopefully won't come soon, but another something is going to happen, right? Whether that's a natural disaster in your region or whether that's something else. And so we want to make sure we're ahead of that and not behind that, so that we're not making things difficult as we go. If we make things a little bit difficult right now, in the next crisis, they will become much more difficult. It compounds. This takes me to this lesson learned, and I think a lot of organizations kind of found this. They thought they were ahead, and all of a sudden they realize very painfully that they were behind. So if you ever find yourself thinking, I'm ahead of the game, I'm ahead, you know, check yourself, if you will, and realize that you're probably behind, or you might be behind. And so don't get lazy, don't get complacent. Firms that sort of let their technology slip were woken up pretty abruptly during the pandemic. I want to talk about a couple of examples. You know, a lot of organizations sent people home, and the people at home didn't have the ability to OCR when they scan documents in. Maybe they didn't have a very good scanner at home, or any scanner at all, and they didn't have a way to do OCR text recognition on that. And so now you got all of these scanned items in the system that aren't searchable, aren't full text searchable. Maybe printing was poor. Your end user, your employees, they didn't have good printing situations, or other back office tasks were very difficult to manage in that. And so pick a platform that automates these things, that reduces the need for these things in the first place, right? And goes about doing these things in better ways. Another bullet point: client meetings, collaboration, or contract execution. Those are things that were typically done, heavily face-to-face or heavily in person. And now all of a sudden that shifted, and we had to do them remotely somehow. Firms that already had solutions in place for contract execution, collaboration, and these client meetings like we're doing today, right, were light years ahead when that pandemic hit. The other thing is just hardware technology as well. Laptops, desktops, mobile apps, or mobile devices was critical in the move to a remote working situation. So these smart tech choices can really help you stand out when the next crisis happens, because it will happen. The question is when, not if, a crisis happens, right? At whatever scale that crisis is. So how do we apply that? How do we apply that lesson? Well, we have to be strategic. We have to be deliberate with technology. I think a lot of times partners at firms and some of the stakeholders at organizations, they look at investments in technology as sort of a time sink or a money sink, and really it's not that at all. It needs to be looked at as an investment. And to make it an investment, just like you would do with any financial investment, you have to invest time to research what you're investing in, to really understand where you're putting your money. And if you allocate that time in your day-to-day, periodically, incrementally, that will build on itself. And the technology that you end up selecting with a deliberate and strategic strategy will really multiply the time investment you put in to build that strategy for your particular organization. So it's important to research those tools periodically. Don't get complacent. The legal technology space especially, is changing rapidly, right? For many years, legal tech sort of was slower than some of the other technology spaces. We know that. We're in legal technology, right? Law firms many times are conservative, and other organizations can be conservative, large organizations. But if we keep up on this technology, we can see it changing. We've seen it change a lot recently. We've seen some significant investments in net documents as well from private equity and other kinds of financial institutions that see this as a growing important space in the legal technology world. And we're excited about that. So remember, it changes quick now. It's now changing quick in legal technology. Maybe 10 years ago, it wasn't changing quite so fast. Now it's changing pretty fast. So review it periodically. Also, it's important to identify resilient technology that can really, truly grow with you as you grow as a firm, as you move into different markets or different areas of law, and make sure that that technology is accessible from anywhere, but that it's accessible securely from anywhere, right? As people went home, we talked about this security just a little bit. So we want things like two-factor authentication. We want integration with your Active Directory or whatever identity provider you choose. You want some flexibility around that so that you can have single sign-in, but with the two-factor authentication from wherever you are. So it's important that be a secure integration and a secure platform. All right, problem 3, dull saws. All right, this is an ode to Franklin Covey, of course. If you know Franklin Covey, he talked about sharpening the saw. The problem that we saw with COVID is that there were a lot of dull saws around. And what I mean by that is just a little anecdote, a little story here. Here in Utah, back in September, that was right at the height of the pandemic for us. That was kind of the peak in cases for us. Everything, was as shut down as it ever got during the pandemic here in Utah. And we had this massive windstorm come through, hurricane force winds in some areas, and that's super rare for Utah. Obviously, we're not anywhere near the coast, and these big trees in our neighborhood were just getting pummeled, right? Once that windstorm passed, a lot of trees were knocked down. Some had fallen onto houses and caused other problems, and there were a lot of dull saws around, right? People had these old chainsaws that they hadn't used in a few years, and all of a sudden they pull them out and they don't work, right? But some people had the sharpened saw. They had the saw that was tuned up and ready to go, just already. They had done the prep work beforehand, and so they were able to come out and really, cut down some of those trees and clean up. And it was fantastic to see that happen in our neighborhood. In fact, we went out and we cut down trees and cleaned up things, and it was nice to have that sharpened saw, right? But what we saw in the legal technology world was a dull saw. Lots of people were untrained, and so when they were sent home, they struggled to adapt to that new situation, right? It's not enough to spend time sharpening that saw in the middle of a crisis. You have to do it before, so that saw is ready to go when the crisis happens. And agility really matters. I was reading one of these surveys. This is a Cisco survey, and they surveyed people about the pandemic and about their company's situations and questions and decisions during the pandemic. And 58%, so more than half not too far away from 2/3 really, right? But more than half of the respondents said that they had to go through sort of a crash course in technology. But here's the kicker. The technology that they had to rapidly learn was actually already in place at their organization pre-pandemic. They could have learned it before the pandemic. That would have smoothed out that transition to remote working. It was already there available to them. The firm had already purchased it pre-pandemic. 58% of these people said all of a sudden they were scrambling to learn something that was already previously available to them. So look around your firm, look around your organization. Is there a tool of your trade that you haven't learned yet? Dedicate some time to go learn that tool of the trade so that you're ready in the next crisis. So Dole saw that was the problem. So learn the tools of the trade, right? That's the lesson learned. I want to talk about a couple of other industries here. Tools of the trade are incredibly important. I look to surgeons in the medical industry. They've embraced technology, some of these super high-tech technologies, including AI and other things, and they've increased their success rates, even as surgeries have been getting more challenging, where they've chosen to take on more challenging surgeries. One of the cool technologies is positron emission tomography, which is a way that a heart surgeon, can visualize the heart's blood flow before surgery. They can see where that blood is flowing well and where it's not. So over on the right, in the top right, the red is where that blood is not flowing well and that heart is struggling in that part of the heart. And so they can tell that, that blood vessel, that artery right there is the troublesome one. They need to go in, and they can take a very targeted approach. So that person being operated on is minimally impacted by this surgery, right? Previously, they would have had to spend a lot more time on the operating table. And now they can do a very targeted surgery and fix the issue right there quickly. Additionally, certain fertility treatments have seen 142% higher odds of success with high-tech clean rooms, okay? And fertility treatments are not something that we think of as like a surgery where it needs an ultra high-tech clean room. But what they found is that as they adopted this new technology of these HEPA-filtered clean rooms, the fertility success skyrocketed, right, for these fertility treatments. And doctors knew about this, and they pushed for the changes. So I'd encourage you as a lawyer or as a technology specialist at your firm, push for these changes. Learn about the technology in the legal industry and push for these changes. And that's how we can move forward. Learn the technology. And then lesson 3 is sharpen the saw. You have to know how to use the tool of the trade. Going back to that heart example, if that surgeon didn't know how to use that tool properly, they could not save as many lives, literally, right? If you don't know how to use the tools of your trade, you might not be shining the right light on your talents. And so it's important to learn the tools of the trade so that you can do your job most effectively. One of the ways you can do this truly is to invest time incrementally. Set aside time, maybe it's a little bit per week. I love some of the continuing education initiatives, right? As a lawyer, you need to go through some continuing education. It's important to augment that and to build upon that and not treat it just as a side project, but treat it as core to your business. You are learning the tools of your trade, right? So you can practice law better. Same thing with support staff. It's important to learn the tools that you're using day in, day out so you can do your best work. And it really pays off in unexpected ways. There was some of that Cisco survey as well that sort of shined a light on this and showed how when you learn that technology little bit by bit over time, then when something big comes, you're ready for it. You're prepared for it, right? It's important to work with training partners, especially in the small and medium-sized space. It's important to work with training partners and consultants so that they can help you to know what you don't know, right? We don't know what we don't know. And so it's important to find somebody that does know about that and has a high exposure in the legal market or in the technology space, and they can help you understand and learn the new things. Excuse me. One of the things that we saw, I was talking with one of our customers actually just the other day, a relatively small firm, 8 users in Canada. And as I was talking to them, he had actually, the main partner there, he had mentioned that his training partner was key to their success in helping them get new technologies implemented and get trained up on new technologies and getting them ramped up, because that training partner had been through it before. So review your partners, review your consultants, invest the time in those training partners and consultants to help you know what you don't know. And then when you do get to training, when you do get to implementing, you know, the rubber meets the road, it's time to implement, it's time to launch some new technology initiative. It's very important, going back to the fact that people are core to your business, it's incredibly important to give your employees the big picture, right? Don't just tell them to point here or click here or do this or do that. Tell them why they are doing that, right? This law firm I was talking with gave a fantastic anecdote, actually, where he had implemented a new piece of technology called Set Builder that we have, that is a way to create closing sets. And this was a high transaction firm, so they did, like, you know, wills and real estate and wills and trusts and that sort of thing. And they, with this Set Builder, they were able to increase their throughput by basically a whole employee. And so it was as if they had hired a whole other employee, but they didn't. And of course, the technology was much cheaper than that. And so they were able to augment and increase their throughput by using this Set Builder. But they had to train their employees on this, and they had to get their employees to see that vision, right? They had to get their staff to see that vision of why we're going to do it in this new way, why we're going to do these closing sets in this new way. And that's because then we can free up time for these employees to really use their talents rather than doing sort of mundane tasks. Okay. So they needed to train on that. There was some training on that that was involved. All right. Problem number 4. We have a situation where when COVID started, we saw firms sort of waffling to and fro with decisions. We saw organizations across the board doing this, like what works best, what doesn't work. And there was a lot of uninformed decision making going on. And that was problematic. It caused for downtime for firms in many ways, where employees were questioning how they should move forward or what approach they should take working from home. And so really having clarity and data-driven decisions is critical, and I think is a lesson learned that we need to take into the next crisis that we will run into at some point, no matter how big or how small it is. We need data to drive those good decisions. Of course, as an employee, you want data to measure how well you're doing. You know, I as a product manager, I need that data so I can know that things are being released on time or maybe not released on time, and we need to make an adjustment, right? I need data to know how these things are being adopted by our customers and how well they're working. And that data comes both in qualitative data as well as in quantitative data. And technology can really help drive the quantitative data for us very effectively. And if we can use this data and these metrics, or these data and the metrics, to really demonstrate value of a particular technology, that's how we can really drive that technology forward in the business. That the business is always after value, of course, so that if we can demonstrate the value using this data, then we can make the case that, you know, a given technology is important to put in at the organization. One thing we saw at the pandemic and throughout the legal tech industry over the last 15 years, 10 years especially, has been that firms have sort of resisted that remote work for a lot of years. And I think a lot of firms are sort of conservative, if you will. I think a lot of firms think and feel that their employees have to be at the office working in order for them to actually be doing work, right? I feel like COVID and the pandemic has sort of flipped that on its head. I hope that's the same for many of you, and shown that by and large, people want to do good work no matter where they are, whether they're remote or anywhere else, and that the remote work and a flexible work policy can truly drive your organization forward. I was talking again to a law firm, and they, a number of years ago, they've actually been a customer of ours since 2016, but prior to that, a number of years prior to that, they did not have a remote work policy. And one of their key partners had a baby, and she was looking for some more flexibility with remote work. And she was incredibly talented. And unfortunately, because of the lack of a remote work policy, that person left the organization. Person went to find another organization that would allow for some flexible work. She wanted to, of course, bring her talents to the table at whatever organization she was at, but needed some of that flexible work and remote work to be able to bring those talents to the business. And so that firm lost out, unfortunately, and the partner sort of lamented and didn't, was sad that had happened. But that was a light bulb moment for the partner to say, we've got to change. We've got to be competitive. We've got to retain this good talent and have ways to retain it. And so that's where they shifted to remote work. And then later adopted NetDocuments and were mostly remote work before the pandemic even. So going to the pandemic was just a smooth transition. A really fantastic kind of case study on that remote work and the flexibility. Without a way to kind of measure the success, an employee will always sort of be questioning their performance, and people looking at that employee, maybe their managers and things, will base a lot of decisions off of intuition, and that's not a good situation, especially in the remote work environment, right? We want to base it on data. We want to base it on the right things. So the lesson is that data drives good decisions in your firm. We can take a cue from sales and marketing here. Sales and marketing functions have been using data to measure success and test different marketing approaches and test different campaigns for some time, for decades, really. And the technology really supports that detailed reporting and can drive value, can show the value of why that technology is important. And we're starting to see the same thing in legal. It's really a fantastic approach. As we get into some of these platforms that have this data, all this data available, right? All of the documents, the content, the emails, the activities, the time tracking, you name it, it's all there. We just need to surface that data so that we can then execute on it and make good decisions on those data. We want to have these legal professionals and legal organizations take advantage of the data that is at their fingertips, really, but is just under the surface. And we can leverage technology to bring that to the surface and analyze the work that you're doing for the better. We want to choose tech that truly leverages your data. I touched on this just barely. That existing technology houses an incredible amount of performance data, right? Metadata about content in the system and about cases, about documents, about billing and information about clients. Everything is there for you. And we want to make sure that this technology serves it up to you, and maybe it's a dashboard, or maybe it helps you drive decisions and makes recommendations on certain things, and can allow you to monitor your data and understand exactly how your firm is working. So one of the things I really like is some of the analysis. So we have a new, relatively new thing that came out in NetDocuments called Learn, our Learn solution that has analytics, and it allows you to look at a matter, and you can see who has been most active on that matter. You can see which documents have been most heavily touched on that matter. You can see the emails and who has been talking to who within the firm and external to the firm about that matter. Some powerful dashboards to help you monitor the success of that matter for your client that you're servicing as you go through the life cycle of that case or of that matter. So some powerful things there for security monitoring as well, to be able to identify potential breaches or identify anomalous activity that doesn't follow the norm. And you can sort of highlight that and say, oh, there's a problem here, let's go investigate it. As well as DLP and other sort of more preventative measures, right? Data loss prevention and other preventative measures can help too. So in summary, we want to execute a resilient technology plan. These are the four ways to apply the lessons we learned from 2020, or four of the ones that I've chosen here: putting people at the core, being strategic and deliberate, sharpening the saw, invest in that learning of the technology, and then choose technology that leverages your data. So these are exciting times in the legal technology industry. A lot of money is being poured into legal tech, which drives us forward. The AI and the machine learning capabilities at Net Documents, we use it in a number of different ways. I touched on email filing as one of those ways, some of these analytics and other things. We want to really move forward, and we want our firms to keep pace with this technology here, because these resilient firms are the ones that succeed. The resilient firms are the ones that, when a crisis hits, they don't see an impact on their bottom line, and maybe they even become more competitive because you were prepared before that crisis hit. And so we want to keep that in mind as we move forward. We build today, we succeed tomorrow. If we built yesterday, we're already succeeding tomorrow. If we built pre-pandemic, we're already succeeding during the pandemic. As bad as the pandemic is, of course, we never want it to happen. Things like it will happen in life. And we want to make sure that maintaining business continuity is key to our success. We know that it's key to our success. And it only comes if we focus on the work strategies and technology that supports it. So as we come out of the pandemic in certain parts of the world, or hopefully in the near future, coming out of it in other parts of the world, we don't want to lose focus. We don't want to get complacent. Now is not the time to say, whew, we're past that, let's relax. No. The next thing is coming. We want to jump into it and make sure that we are prepared for that next one. So I leave that with you. I'm excited to see what the next chapter brings with this, and look forward to some questions and answers from all of you. So I thank you for your time, and hopefully we'll be able to chat again soon if we don't get your question answered today. But with that, Juan and team, are there any questions that have come up, or anything we want to talk about there?
Thank you, Bradlee. Great insights. A lot of, you touched on so many pieces of the puzzle that are critically important for this digital transformation. It's amazing and refreshing to hear about those lessons learned throughout almost 16, 18 months of very difficult and very tough moments for everyone all over the globe. And to share those in a way that we remember the factors that you comment about: equity, fairness, diversity, and the use of technology as really an important tool to embrace, and to be able to automate the mundane, as you mentioned, which is a key element. Another one is really how to execute on practical basis of those lessons learned. And you use a concept that I liked a lot, which is one source of truth. And I think everyone in the legal field, even if it's in the law firm environment or in a company, we all struggle with that source of truth about, finding the right documents or finding the right information. And information is the name of the game for lawyers. That's a no-brainer, but we probably didn't know that some years ago, and we didn't take advantage of that, and now it's a must. One of the questions from the audience is on that preparation on resilience building. Obviously, it takes a lot of time and a lot of focus and effort. Would you recommend law firms to invest in specific roles in charge of that? Is it viable to outsource it, or is it better to go in-house? What is the best practical approach to take advantage of this?
Yeah, really, in Net Documents, I've seen a couple of different things happen. Early on in Net Documents kind of life cycle, if you will, in the kind of mid and early 2000s, we had the big firms look at us and say, "Oh, Net Documents is just for the small firms." And then now we're sometimes seeing the opposite, that a small firm will see us and say, "Oh, well, that they're really for the big firms." And I found it very interesting because, at our core, we've been largely the same. And so I've actually seen it both ways. I think for different firms, it makes sense. Obviously, a big firm, you're going to have some in-house expertise. It's important to bring that in-house. You're big enough, you can allow for that sort of role. But this firm that I mentioned actually in the presentation there, an eight user firm, is not going to carve out a technology person as an entire role for an 8 user firm, right? That's where you really want to leverage those partners and that partner ecosystem. And I think we're very lucky in the legal technology space that we have an incredible diverse set of partners and consultants in the legal technology space, and really some fantastic ones that we've been pleased to work with over the years. So I think smaller firms, definitely makes sense to outsource. Larger firms, you're going to have someone in-house. But at the same time, with the larger firms, it's very important to consult, to share ideas with other firms and with other partners, and bring those partners in to help you train. That's where the bottleneck is, I think, in many cases, is that training and sharpening that saw for all of your users, and the partners can really help there. And then on the small end, if you can identify one person that can maybe put on a second hat and kind of be that technology person, but not managing it necessarily. The partner, maybe the external partner, should still manage that technology in a smaller firm, but have one person who is kind of up to speed, who's maybe a little bit more tech savvy, to help guide and spend that deliberate time to build a tech strategy for the firm.
Another question, Bradlee, what is and has been a recurring topic over the past two days. What would be your recommendation for anybody, any country, any type of law firm or corporate departments or courts or academia, how to be informed, how to stay informed of those alternatives, of those options, or what is going on in the legal tech environment, in order not to miss the opportunities and also to be able to add the value that people are expecting to get from one, in terms of the knowledge of these digital transformation requirements, demands, and opportunities?
Yeah, to answer that question, I go back to the deliberate aspect of it, right? And by deliberate, I mean spending time, setting aside, booking time out in your calendar to really focus on a particular thing. We're lucky in the legal technology industry. Our kind of media channels and our marketing engine, if you will, within legal technology is pretty good. The media and the communications there is good, and they stay on top of the new technologies that come out. But in a day-to-day life of a lawyer and even a staff member or a technologist, it's hard to spend time to follow all of that. And so I think setting aside some dedicated time, maybe it's just 30 minutes or an hour per week, to really sit down and dig deep on something. One thing that Brian mentioned just prior to this, Brian Kuhn, he kind of talked about how it's really hard to be an expert in many different things, right? The way you become an expert in something is you spend the time, right? We look at that with violin playing. We look at that with instruments, or with any sort of deep heart surgeon or anything like that. They are dedicating a large portion of their time to practicing, right? To doing that thing. And so if we dedicate, maybe it's weekly, 30 minutes or an hour, to dig into the tech and research the landscape, go to some of these, legal tech media outlets and review what's come up recently. That's a great way to learn about some new technology that's coming up. And then with your peers, there are many different forums. There are many different organizations like Logistic and LIT that can help to bring people together just like this. And so it's dedicating that time and being deliberate about that time.
Thanks so much, Bradlee. Great insights, a refreshing story about everything that you comment. Just keeping track of the lessons learned it's something that we will never forget in these times that we're living, and it's something that we should really treasure in terms of the experiences that we had to go through in this sudden transformation for any lawyer playing in the legal ecosystem, that we all needed to kind of reinvent the type of activity that we were providing and the type of operation. And these tools, the new tools, the solutions that are existing, and the leading companies that are transforming the legal industry are necessary guidelines to follow. So we really appreciate your insights, your advice, and it has been a pleasure to have you again.
Likewise, Juan. Thanks, Alex. Thank you both. I appreciate the time.
One more question, Bradlee, while we're here. Since NetDocuments has been one of our original sponsors since many years back, and now it's amazing to see how these 4 years now have basically flipped around the industry and lots of things. I remember in the first event that we had, your CEO was talking about the security issues, the safety of having data on the cloud and all those things. And there was a lot of long faces in the crowd, and that was a physical meeting, so that was a face-to-face. So we saw them, and I know that has changed significantly. And even then, NetDocuments was like military-grade security. What's happening now? Because we have people now from over 40 nationalities. Not all of them are in the top of the world in these matters. So I think that's a fair question about security, data breaches, and all that. So just go on that for a short answer, please.
Yeah, absolutely. That is such a critical piece right now, especially as people work remotely. It all centers around that one source of truth. So if we can have the security at that one source of truth, then we are much better protected. If we have copies of that data in various different locations, then your security model breaks down, right? One of the things that is critically important is these cloud-based platforms like NetDocuments, has been sort of this true cloud from the start since 1999 when we got our start. And so we've been through these processes over the decades and been able to implement that, like you said, military grade there, Alex, the high-tech solutions that protect your data. And we have a team that does that, of course, at NetDocuments, and we're very focused on that, and we're experts in that security and that protection of your data. A law firm, of course, can't apply the same amount of money, really, to achieve the same levels of security as a cloud provider can. It just doesn't make sense to try to do that at every single firm level. And so you leave that to a platform like NetDocuments, and then you can rest assured that that data is secure, that it's protected, and you don't have to spend the millions of dollars that you would have to spend otherwise to implement some of the high technology that we use to protect your data. And so I think that's an important thing for firms to consider. You touched on just a little bit the adoption of the cloud early on. That was a challenge for the first decade of our existence at NetDocuments, was always convincing people why the cloud was more secure. And I think we've seen a sea change recently where that's less of a question now. People know that cloud is more secure, and they know that cloud technology is the way forward in terms of protecting your data. And so that's where we stand at NetDocuments, is helping the firms. And one of the things I love is with audits, for example. A firm contacts us and they say, hey, we're being audited for this, for security reasons. And we just hand them our audit documents, and that covers all of their NetDocument system because it's a single multi-tenanted system that they're using. We can hand them the audit documents. The firm passes that straight through. And again, that's another way that we automate the mundane. It might not be automation in the traditional sense, but it is automation. We hand them that audit, they pass it on to the auditors, they get a big check mark for all of their document management and content storage there. And that's a powerful thing to be able to say, yes, we are secure as a law firm. Even as a small law firm, if you're that 8-user firm I mentioned, they have the same protection, same military grade encryption, high entropy encryption, as well as the same as a large firm does. It's pretty powerful.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And you're welcome to stay for the slides that we're going to share.
Great, yeah.
Important information here for the audience. Let me just jump onto that real quick. And it is very important, and let me make sure that it is very important. The next session is only in 2 hours. The previous days we had it at 1 p.m., but today we are starting at 12 noon Central Time. So that's 2 hours from now, and it is important so you don't miss that first talk that we're going to have. Tom Martin and Richard Trommans, two very big ones in the industry, having a face-to-face chat on some very, very interesting topics regarding market and regulation. And then to wrap it up, we have later from Hogan Lovells a 3-person panel that they're going to be talking also on, well, obviously on AI, but with a different approach. And then, as always, this is a very important piece that we always want to share. The media partners that we have, several magazines, e-magazines, and outlet medias that are from around the world that are helping us to share this information and also the promotion of these events with you. Thank you very much. And also a bunch, we have over 50 support organizations that every year since 4 years ago, they have been supporting us, from law firms, schools, bar associations, academy, universities, and all sorts of players here that make this possible and share the promotion of these events so more people can take advantage of this. So thank you all the support organizations for their unconditional support that we have had from you. And also a reminder, visit the sponsors booths that are there with some information available for you that they have put together for you. The ebook that we have been promoting, The Future of Opportunity, is loaded with 15 articles from top thinkers in the industry. So just go there, download it. It's a very, very nice read for the weekend and should be interesting for all of you. The legal tech competition in Latin America, that's something that we do. We're going to talk about that later today. And a word of wisdom today, laws control the lesser man, right conduct controls the greater one, from Mark Twain. And a quick reaction to change will be more important than having a perfect plan. This is critical. Bradlee mentioned it. We have to sharpen the saw, have it ready, and then react to all these unknowns. So without further ado, we just want to wrap up by thanking our sponsors: iManage, Logistics, NetDocuments, thank you, Bradlee, Hogan Lovells, Esija, Genius Soft, Deloitte Legal, Thomson Reuters, and Lexops Systems. Thank you very, very much. Do a little bit of work and see you in 2 hours to wrap up the Legal Summit. Thank you very much. Bye.